Yeehaw, the real lives of the cowboys. Yeehaw, the real lives of the cowboys. Focus question. What was life like for cattle drive cowboys? Introduction. Mention the word cowboy and a picture quickly comes to your mind. A tough man in boots and a hat who is fast with his gun. While this romantic image is known around the world, the real cowboys were very different. Cowboys didn't spend their time rescuing maidens or getting in shootouts. They were workers who preferred a tough, dangerous, and exhausting job. It was this difficult, lonely work that first made cowboys icons of the American West. The cowboy era begins. In the 1860s, enormous cattle ranches spread over large areas of western North America. Across the huge plains of Texas, Wyoming, Utah, and Montana, ranchers let their cattle wander over the land. The cows grew fat and healthy on the wild grass, but most of the major slaughterhouses and cattle markets were in northern and eastern cities. The ranchers needed some way to round up thousands of cows and take them to railroad station to get them to market. Before the railroad spread to the western states, the only way to do this was on horseback. At the same time, many young men had lost their jobs. The U.S. Civil War left soldiers and formerly enslaved people with few opportunities. People of Mexican descent and Native Americans were forced west as settlers moved in. Many of these out-of-work men went to the western ranches. There are plenty of land and lots of work to be done there. Ranchers hired strong men and taught them to handle horses. They sent them onto the ranch to round up the cattle and march them to railroad stations on their plains. Leading these cattle drives was the original work of cowboys. More than 1/4 of American cowboys were Hispanic, Native, or black. The first cowboys were Mexicans who called themselves vaqueros. They were experienced horse handlers who taught the newcomers how to work with cattle and horses. They invited much of the familiar equipment and clothing that cowboys used, including the lasso, the cowboy hat, a form of the sombrero, and leather chaps. Chaps are like coverings that protect cowboys from cactuses and other spiny plants. The vaqueros are often the ones who captured and tamed mustangs or wild horses for other cowboys to ride. Mustangs are nearly impossible to control until after the skilled vaqueros and tamed them. The vaqueros trained both cowboys and the horses for the grueling cattle drive. Do you know? Many cowboy terms invented by the vaqueros come from Spanish words. Some common examples are chaps from the Spanish word chaparras, radio from the Spanish word meaning to surround, la rieta, a cowboy's rope from the Spanish word la rieta, mustang from the Spanish word mustanos, vaquero, a form of the word vaquero. Cowgirls. Cowgirls were fixtures in the West too. Annie Oakley grew up hunting to feed her family. She became famous for her skills as a sharpshooter and went on to travel the globe in Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show, the first woman in the show. She could shoot the cork of a bottle, hit a dime tossed in the air, and split a playing card on its edge. Mary Field, nicknamed Stagecoach Mary, was born enslavement and freed following the Civil War. After moving west, she became a mail carrier and was known for delivering mail during harsh weather and for fighting off coach robbers. She even fought off a pack of wolves. Johanna Julie was a black Seminole vaquera born in northern Mexico. She was known for her horse riding skills, particularly riding side saddle and bareback. She worked as a translator and tamed wild horses for the U.S. Army. The cattle drive. The roundup. The cowboys' first task was to go out from the ranch house and gather all the cattle for the drive. The ranchers had branded their cattle, or burned a pattern into their skin, so they could tell whose cow was whose. This was necessary because the cattle were scattered over miles and mixed in with other herds. The cowboys herded the cattle onto the ranch, sorted them, branded any new calves, and prepared for the long trek ahead. On the, on the trail, about 2,500 cattle and 15 to 20 cowboys went on a typical cattle drive. This included the trail boss, who was the highest paid member of the crew. The trail boss was the leader of the drive. He was responsible for deciding the price of the cattle at the railroad station. The cook, who often served as the drive's doctor, drove a truck wagon filled with food, supplies, medicine, and other goods. Even though he did not handle cows or horses, the cook was a highly respected member of the crew. A wrangler, usually a teenage boy, kept track of the extra horses. Cowboys needed to switch horses when the horses became tired, sick, or hurt. For the first few days, the cowboys drove the cattle hard, trying to get them away from familiar land. The cattle were not used to being in a large group, and they tried to run back to their old pastures. But after a few days, the pace relaxed. Cows were sold by the pound, and going too fast would make them lose weight. New cowboys or greenhorns rode on in the back. This was the worst place to be. The cows kicked out lots of dust and left piles of smelly dung behind. Bandanas came in handy, keeping dust and bad smells away from the cowboy's mouth and nose. The trail boss and the cook rode ahead of the herd, searching for the next night's campsite. In the dry west, water sources were very important. The cook and trail boss had to be excellent navigators in order to find them. The cook set up camp and began dinner while the cattle followed behind. In a day's ride, the group could travel 15 to 20 miles, 24 to 32 kilometers. Cowboys often rode 16 hours a day through rains, storms, and terrible heat. The cowboys had kept sun and rain off their faces. Tough cowboy boots sat comfortably in the stirrups and protected the cowboys' ankles from biting insects, scorpions, snakes. The boots had pointed toes, so if a cowboy fell off his horse, he could slip his foot out of the stirrup before he was trampled. At night, at least two cowboys also always stood guard. They even ate dinner in shifts so that someone could always catch the cattle. Guards rode their horses around the herd, making sure no cows ran away. They watched for wild animals such as wolves or coyotes. And for many human thieves or attackers, they often sang quiet, lonesome songs under the stars in order to keep the cows calm. The last late night watch would take the cook, who would begin breakfast, and the drive would move again. Try these. Sing a cowboy song. All you need is a lonely place under the stars. This cowboy song is about an old cowboy who misses his job on the trail. Thunder of hoofs on the range as you ride, missing of iron and sizzling of hide, bellows of cattle and snorts of cayuse. Longhorns from Texas as wild as the Adele's midnight stampedes and milling of herds, yells of the cowman too angry for words. Right in the thick of it all would I stay, make me a cowboy again for a day. Cowboy food wasn't much to crow about. Any supplies had to be cheap and non-perishable. The most common foods were beans, hot cakes, and biscuits, which the cook made freshly daily, canned fruit, bacon, and strong coffees. Since the cowboys were exercising all day, they ate quite a lot and kept the cook busy. The cook often hunted and fished to add to the cowboys' diet. The market. A cattle drive usually lasted 2 to 3 months, 7 days a week. At the end of the drive, the cowboys led the cattle through the streets of a railroad town and loaded them on trains bound north and east. Afterward, the cowboys got much needed baths and haircuts. They relaxed in saloons, dance halls, and theaters, and bought more supplies before heading home. The ride back often went much faster than the drive. The cowboys could get a good night's sleep under the stars and spend their extra time hunting and fishing. Once back in ranchland, they would begin looking to get tired on the next drive. Stampede and other dangers. Cows are herd animals, which means they travel in groups for protection. Wild herd animals such as buffalo and wild beasts have one defense against predators and other dangers. The stampede. As a group, they ran at top speed, trampling everything in their path in hopes of outrunning, hurting, or confusing their predators. Stampedes were a cowboy's biggest fear. While on the trail, the cows were nervous and stressed. A rattlesnake, lightning, or any sudden loud noise could startle the cattle and cause a stampede. Thousands of cattle would run forward at once. The cows moved so quickly that they often hurt or killed themselves by falling off cliffs, drowning in rivers, or catching their legs in holes. Often, stampedes happened at night when the cowboys couldn't see the cows or any dangers they might run into. The only way to stop a stampede was by circling the cattle. Do you know? Native Americans often tended cattle on their lands, as white settlers pushed further west and stole more native lands. They also allowed their cows to feed on native lands. Native Americans needed the grass to feed their own cows. So if the cattle drives wished to cross their land, the Native Americans charged a toll of 10 cents for each cow. Sometimes if the trail boss refused to pay, the Native Americans retaliated by sneaking up on the drive during the night and starting a stampede. The most experienced cowboys would leap on the strongest, fastest horses. They would ride closely alongside the herd and force cows to crowd together by shouting and bumping against them. They made the cows on the outside run in a circle, and the cows on the inside would follow. Once they were running in a circle, the cattle would eventually get tired and stop. This was not an easy task. A cow could knock a cowboy off his horse and trample or gore him. The horse itself could get scared and run off. If stampedes happened at night, the cowboys' horses were vulnerable to the same cliffs, rivers, and holes as the cattle were. And sometimes the cows refused to go into a circle. Instead, they ran off in any direction. The cattle drive was forced to wait while the cowboys rode across the wilderness, gathered up every stray cow. River crossings were also dangerous. Cows could drown or become caught in deep sand. Rattlesnakes and scorpions threatened the lives of both cattle and cowboys. The cowboys were miles from any hospital to treat injuries and infections. Cattle and horse rustlers were a common and hated danger of the drive. The West also had dangerous weather, including flash floods, tornadoes, and lightning. Cowboys even developed a superstition about lightning striking white horses. The western United States can also become harshly cold even in the summertime. Records show that many cowboys died of pneumonia and hypothermia. The end of the era. Though cowboys became famous for their bravery, the need for cattle drives didn't last long. The railroad expanded rapidly. Eventually, the trains come to Texas, Colorado, and other ranch states. Ranchers no longer needed to drive their cattle hundreds of miles to distant stations. After the invention of barbed wire, ranchers also began fencing in their land. Rounding up cows was no longer necessary. Even if the cowboys wanted to continue the cattle drives, the fences would block their way. Do you know? One breed of cattle in Texas in the 1860s was an especially mean breed called Texas Longhorn. Their huge horns could span 9 feet, 2.7 meters. During the Civil War, when ranchers were away, the cows had run wild. Some of the Longhorns had never seen a human being before, and they often attacked and killed cowboys and their horses. While Longhorns were mean, they weren't very tough when it came to disease or weather. Longhorns carried a disease called Texas fever. They could spread to other cattle. An extremely harsh winter in 1886 froze thousands of Longhorns to death. This tragedy was one of the things that helped end the cowboy era. But the cowboy life was far from over. Just as real cowboys were finding themselves out of work, Buffalo Bill Cody began his Wild West show. Cowboys were hired to show their riding and roping skills to crowds across the United States and Europe. Annie Oakley, one of the most famous cowgirls, was a star of the Wild West show. It was a show that really created the land of the American cowboy. The show included plays and acts that portrayed cowboys as rough and tough gunslingers, even though few had carried guns in real life. Long after settlers colonized the American West, Western movies exploded in popularity. During the 1950s and 1960s, cowboy movies, television shows, toys, and games were everywhere. The Lone Ranger and Bonanza became popular TV shows. Children played cowboys and Indians in schoolyards, even though in the real West, Native Americans often were cowboys. Today you can see cowboy boots and hats in Tokyo and Paris, a symbol of carefree manliness. The cowboy image is used to sell jeans, trucks, and cigarettes, but that image wouldn't exist without the real cowboys in the American West.